Today we talked about the last part of transformations of quadratics. We're talking about the a value. We also talked about putting everything together, so doing a, h, and k all at once, and we also worked on graphing. Graphing is going to be in a separate video. This video is just going to be about just a at first, and then a, h, and k all together. So graphing will be in a second video if that's the part that you were kind of struggling with today. So first thing we're going to talk about is the a value. In this part, all we're thinking about is the number. So not the sign. We don't care about positive and negative here. All we care about is the number. So the number tells you two things. It tells you if there is a vertical stretch or if there is a vertical shrink. So there is a vertical stretch if your a is bigger than 1. And it's a vertical shrink if your a is between 0 and 1. Vertical stretch is when your graph gets more narrow, so it goes up faster. And a vertical shrink is when your graph is more wide, so it's going up slower. So stretch is kind of like tall and skinny. Shrink is kind of like short and fat. The other thing a tells us, this part is all about the sign, is whether or not there is a reflection. Right? The only type of reflection we care about is a reflection over the x-axis. That's going to happen if your a is negative. So regardless of if the number is bigger than 1 or smaller than 1, if it's negative at all, then there's a reflection over the x-axis. If your a is positive, then there is no reflection. So when we look at these examples, our first example, our a is positive 4. So our a is two things. Our a is 4, and our a is positive. So that 4 tells us that there is a vertical stretch of 4. And the fact that it's positive tells us that there is no reflection going on. So again, when you're talking about a, this is the only one you have to really think about it. You have to worry about the sign and the number, doing two different things. So on b, our a value is 1/4. So again, the number is 1/4. The sign is positive. So 1/4, that is smaller than 1. If you have a hard time with the fractions, always think about it as a decimal. 1/4 is 0.25. 0.25 is less than 1. So this is a vertical shrink of 1/4. And a is positive. And once again, that means there is no reflection. So there's a vertical shrink of 1/4 happening, and there is no reflection. C, D, there's no E, C, D, F, and G are written a little bit differently, but it still works the same way. The number out front is still your a value. So like on number 4, or not number 4, letter G, this -4 is your a. So the number part is 4, the sign is negative. So that 4, just like before, it tells us that there's a vertical stretch of 4. That's the first thing we know. And then that it's negative, that tells us that there's a reflection over the x-axis. And do one more with you guys. Letter D is f of x is equal to -x squared. Remember, that's the same thing as -1x squared. So my number part is 1, my sign is negative. If A is just 1, there is no shrink or stretch. So it's just going to stay the same width. It's not going to get skinnier, it's not going to get fatter. And if A is negative, there's a reflection over the x-axis. And then before we got started on putting it all together, I wanted you guys, we're going to do graphing in a second. We did kind of like quick little summary notes on the back of your paper. So remember, we're working in vertex form, which is y is equal to a times x minus h squared plus k. A is what we just talked about. So if your A is bigger than 1, then there's a vertical stretch. If your A was between 0 and 1, there's a vertical shrink. If your A is negative, there's a reflection over the x-axis. And if your A is positive, there is no reflection. Writing this down again might help you retain it a little bit better. I know that the more I work out problems and the more I write notes, the better it sticks in my brain. So always feel free to print out a blank copy of notes or whatever, or rework problems on scratch paper, or get yourself a dry erase board that you can write on and wipe off and write on and wipe off, and that might help you guys retain things a little bit better. So if you're struggling with how do I get this to stick, you can always try that and see if it works. H was our tricky part because it has minus h in our formula. If your h is positive, it goes to the right. But remember, if your h is positive, it's going to look like x minus something. If your h is negative, it goes to the left. But minus a negative is going to look like addition. So just remember that. H is a little bit trickier. And K is our up and down. If K is positive, we're going up. If K is negative, we're going down. So those are kind of the 4 things you have to look at. The number of A, the sign of A, H, and K. Okay, for a couple more seconds. Remember, it's a video, so you can always pause this if you want to write this down, if you want to come back and look at it. Alright, so putting it all together. If I look at this first one, A is negative 1. It's negative and there's no number, so that's an imaginary 1. My H, it says x minus 4. Remember, that's x minus a positive 4. So my H is 4. And my K is 7. Since my A is negative, that tells me there's a reflection across the x-axis. And since the number part is 1, that tells me that there is no stretch or shrink. Since my H is positive 4, that tells me that we are going right 4. You also might see things like shift right 4, translate right 4, move right 4. Any of those wordings are fine. And our K is a positive 7, which tells us that we are going up 7. So again, you could say shift up 7, translate left up 7, however you want to word it. And then we also want to name the vertex. And remember that your vertex is always going to be found at H, K. So once you have H and K, the vertex part should be pretty easy. Let's see if I can find another colored pen. So my vertex here is at HK. So 4, 7. And that's it. So on B, my A is -2, my H is -2, my K is 5. Now if you're saying, where are you getting -2 from, remember that x plus 2 is x minus -2. So that's where the -2 is coming from for H. So since A is negative, that tells me there's a reflection across the x-axis. Two tells me there's a vertical stretch of 2. This -2 for H tells me that we are going left 2. And since K is +5, that tells me that we are going up 5. And last but not least, our vertex is at HK. So my vertex is at -2, 5. Alright, creating equations. So kind of like the opposite of here. They're going to give us the descriptions and we have to write the equation. So before we get started, I'm just going to write my formula off to the side so I don't forget it. So I'm going to need to know 3 things. I'm going to need to know A, H, and K for each one of these problems. Let me grab a highlighter. No, don't know where my highlighters are. So we'll just stick with the colored pens. So, first thing it tells us, we are going down 4 units. Up and down are your K values. So this tells you that K is -4. Then it tells me that we are going right 1 unit. Left and right are your H. H is positive since it's going to the right. And reflecting across the x-axis tells me that my A is going to be negative. Since it doesn't say anything about stretching or shrinking, I know that my A is just going to be -1. So all I have to do now is plug this A in here, this H in here, and this K value in there. So y is equal to A times x minus h, and I'm going to write it as minus a positive for right now, just kind of stick it in your brain, -4. And then simplify everything. -1, you're not going to see that 1 there on answer choices, and that's not how it's written correctly, properly, if you will. So -1 is just going to become that minus out front with that imaginary 1. Minus a positive is just minus. And then there's nothing to do with that 4. So this is how you would write your final answer on A. All right, on B, we are shifting up 6 units. So again, that's K. This time it's positive. Reflecting across the x-axis, that tells me my A is negative. And stretching by a factor of 3, which tells me my A is 3. So using these 2 things, I know that my A is -3. Now it doesn't say anything about left or right. That means that my H is 0. No left or right happening here. So just plug everything back in to this equation. A, H, and K, alphabetical order. So y is equal to -3 times x minus 0 squared plus 6. Subtracting 0 is not going to change that value of x, so this is just going to become -3x squared plus